Hi everyone and welcome to Lanarkshire Family History Society's webinar for April. My name is Claire Wilson and I am your host for this evening. Just the first Kilted conference arranged by Christine Woodcock and myself kicked off last month and we received some amazing feedback. We would like to take this time to thank Lanarkshire Family History Society for donating some door prizes for these events. It is much appreciated. The next conference takes place on Saturday the 18th of June when the topic will be crime and punishment, and we have some amazing speakers for you. For anyone interested, I'll pop some details into the e-news or you can get it via Christine or my own website. So our speaker this evening is Sahar Sardar. Sahar is the Public Engagement Coordinator covering the South and West region of Scotland for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, which is an organisation that strives to ensure the stories of the 1.7 million Commonwealth servicemen and women are not forgotten. In this talk, Sahar will briefly go over the history of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, their origins, and then we'll explore some of the gems of their collection, as well as she's going to show us as well how to use and access the records. She'll also show us some other websites that might be useful in your research as well. Hi Sahar, how are you?
I'm good. I'm doing well. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to doing the presentation today.
Yeah, I'll let you just share your screen.
Okay, no problem. Let me just share the screen and hopefully we'll take it from there. Slideshow from beginning. Oops. I feel like there's a delay all the time.
I know. You're never sure if it's you or someone else.
I know. So it should just be loading at the moment.
There's always that thought of, do I click something just as it gets to the point of loading? Right, so it's showing your notes.
There we go. Is that better?
Not yet. That's it.
Okay, brilliant. So, like Claire mentioned, my name is Sahar Sardar, and I am the Public Engagement Coordinator for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. I cover the South and West region of Scotland, and today I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about our archives and why it is an archive of international importance. So the themes that I'm going to be covering in today's talk are these themes that you see on the screen here. So I'm going to talk about our origins, how we got started, the history of the commission, and then also explore some of the gems in our collection and inform you on how to best use and access our record. But I'll also be talking a little bit about some controversies that affected, especially in the beginning of our organisation when we were initially getting set up by Sir Fabian Ware. So let's talk about our origins. So this man here is Sir Fabian Ware. He is super important to us. He is the individual who founded the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and can really be considered to be our hero. He's so important. So just to give you a little bit of context on how important the commission was and still is, before the First World War, the common soldier and sailor who died before the 20th century could expect very little in death. Marked graves were rare and often left untended, and little, if anything, was officially recorded. Sir Fabian Ware, he was a driving force behind the creation of the commission. At the age of 45, he was too old to actually go out and fight during the First World War, but he wanted to do his part, so he volunteered his services and became the commander of a mobile unit of the British Red Cross. He was really concerned with the fact that the final resting places of the dead would be lost forever, which is why his unit then began recording all the graves that they could find. And by 1915, their work was given official recognition by the War Office and incorporated into the British Army as the Directorate of the Graves Registration and Inquiries, or the DGRE. From the outset, Ware emphasised the importance of the imperial contribution to the war effort. He was really encouraged by the then Prince of Wales to submit a memorandum to the Imperial War Conference and to make this the Commonwealth War Graves Commission a reality. In May 1917, the Imperial War Graves Commission, which is what the Commonwealth War Graves Commission was previously known as, was established by royal charter with the Prince of Wales serving as president and Ware as vice chairman. The Commission's work began in earnest after the armistice, once land for cemeteries and memorials had been guaranteed. The enormous task of actually recording the details of the dead, locating and formalising burials and cemeteries would begin. By 1918, some 587,000 graves had been identified and a further 559,000 dead were registered as having no known grave. So on this slide here, you should see a blue booklet come up. That is where we have our founding principles. The founding principles were detailed in the blue booklet, which is called the Kenyon Report in 1918. It was a proposition put together by Sir Frederick Kenyon to Parliament in order to set up the commission. And it is probably the item that our archivists would save if there was ever a fire at head office. It is so valuable to us. What was decided effectively in this book was that each of the dead would be commemorated by name or should be commemorated by name on the headstone or memorial. Headstone and memorials should be made permanent, and headstones should all be the same with no distinction being made on account of military or civil rank. Moving on to how you can read a standard commission headstone. So if you're ever in a cemetery which has a war grave, this is what a typical war grave would look like. The layout of a headstone is all the same. They're all curved with a rounded top, and individual graves are marked by uniform headstones with inscribed on each headstone are the details of the individual. So here we would have the regimental unit or service badge right at the top. Then that is followed by the service particulars, so the details of the casualty, their name, their rank, what regiment that they served under. This is usually followed by the date of death and their age, if it's known. And then we have the two ways in which families could make their mark on a Commonwealth War Grave Commission headstone, and that is through the religious emblem and the personal inscription. Now, the religious emblems could vary. It just depends on what religious background your family or next of kin said that you were from. So if you were from a Christian faith background, you'd get this typical, this very simple Christian cross inscribed onto your headstone. But if you came from a different religious or faith background, for example, if you were Jewish, you'd have the corresponding religious symbol. So if you were Jewish, you'd have the Star of David. If you're a Muslim, you'd have Arabic script rather than a symbol. So it would be, if I'm correct, it's in Arabic, it would be Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, which is a prayer for the dead. And then personal inscriptions, of course, is another way in which families could leave their mark. And they could be, people could choose from a vast number, or they could choose from a lot of different personal inscriptions. It could be very simple, like Our Jack, or they could choose from religious verses, Bible verses, or from verses from literature, which would have been much better known during that time than they are now. And personal inscriptions are, of course, my favourite part of any war grave. They were a bit like social media, like as now, like Twitter, for example. They had to be only within a certain characteristic, so they could only be 66 characters maximum. And there's this one in France, which is a musical notation, so it's tune, but it's not a very recognisable one. It's not a famous one. It can be played and has been played on a variety of different instruments. So it's been played on the flute, pipes, fiddle, but it's not a very known tune. And until quite recently, it was the only personal inscription with a musical notation. But quite recently, a casualty was identified, their headstone erected, and their family actually chose to have a few bars of music as a personal inscription as well. Now, the one in France, that is, it was most likely been the case that it was the musical notation was created either by the family or by the casualty themselves. Now, not all of these details will be present in all cases, and the layout will vary depending from person to person based upon the information that was available and given to us by the Ministry of Defence at the time. And not, for example, personal inscriptions, they're not included in every headstone. So if you were serving as part of, if you served with New Zealand, then you wouldn't get a personal inscription at all because their government made a decision that no casualty that served with New Zealand would have a personal inscription on their war grave. So, like I mentioned, no, not all of these details will be present at all times. Moving on to qualifying criteria. So these two dates are super important. We are only responsible for those that died within these two time frames. So for the First World War, that is the 4th of August 1914 to the 31st of August 1921. And for the Second World War, that would be the 3rd of September 1939 to the 31st of December 1947. They are longer than what we might normally consider to be the war period. For example, the First World War ended in 1918, as we all know, and the Second World War in 1945. But the reason they're a lot longer is because a lot of individual peace treaties needed to be signed. And the 31st of August 1921 is a date for administrative purposes that war was declared to have ended by the British government. And a similar period was then also added for the Second World War. Now, in every respect, it was the records rather than the cemeteries and memorials that made everything possible. So from the 1914, when Sir Fabian Ware created a mobile unit of the Red Cross, initially they were only responsible for the collection of the wounded, but they soon began to keep records of the burial place of the dead, which was, of course, later formalised under the DGRE. The records of Ware's mobile unit and later the DGRE were both key milestones in the formation of the Imperial War Graves Commission. Without these records, the task of commemoration would have been impossible. Now, moving on to our archives. So, the Commission's archive is a collection of over 10,000 items relating to the Commonwealth War Grave Commission's history from its founding in 1917 up until the present day. And it is a very important repository of information. Through this, you're able to better understand the Commission's work, our policies, our activities in maintaining the war graves of the First and Second World War. The archive collection includes personal correspondence, staff records, maintenance and tour reports, meeting minutes of the various committees involved with the Commission's work, as well as photos, press cuttings, and architectural plans. The archive team is responsible for preserving and providing access to the archive collection, and in doing so, a large number of items from the collection have already been digitised and made available through the Commission's online archive catalogue that can be accessed through http // archive.cwgc.org / or you can just type it CWGC archives in Google, or access it through our website that I just mentioned. More recently, we have released over 16,000 black and white photo negatives showing the Commission's cemeteries and memorials and over 1,000 files of correspondence between the Commission and next of kin of the First World War casualties onto our online database. Or online catalogue, sorry. Now, like I mentioned previously, the aim of the Commission's archive is to collect, manage, and preserve materials that document the history of our organisation, the individuals we commemorate, and of course, the cemeteries and memorials we maintain. Our archives, to meet this aim, are essentially split into two different parts. We have the Casualty Archive and the Commission's archive, and from the slide, you can get a better idea of what you will find in each. Now, it is actually the Casualty Archive, which is the centrepiece of our archives, and without which the Commission wouldn't really be able to fulfil our aims. It used to be a three-part card index that was placed alphabetically by name, country, and by regiment and service. This index card actually filled 3,000 drawers, and even when it was stacked 4 high, it stretched for 450 feet. It was huge, absolutely huge. Now, in 1998, that is when the casualty records were beginning to be made available online. And now you can access all our casualty records online, and it is constantly being updated. For example, in the Western Front alone, we are finding 32 to 40 bodies per year. So every year we're finding 30 to 40 more casualties. So that list is constantly being updated, and our archives online are constantly being updated as well. When you're wanting to find a specific casualty, you can do that through the Commission's website. You can search the archive using a range of different criteria, as you can see from this image on the slide. We also have a series of research guides that you can access on this webpage as well. If you click the green button, How to Research, These research guides will take you step by step through the research process, as well as make recommendations as to where you can look for information. These bite-sized guides are mainly there to help you research more about the casualties that served during the First World War, either in the Army, Air Force, Royal Navy, or Merchant Navy. Or if you have an interest in a casualty whose country of service was, for example, South Africa, the West Indies, Undivided India, or Canada, we also have specific guides made on them. And if you're particularly interested in learning more about women that served and died during the First World War, we also have guides created that may be of particular interest. These guides will again help in not only informing you how to research that casualty using our website, but they will also list secondary sites that might be of particular interest when trying to supplement the information that is already available on our site. For example, you can use A Street Near You, which is a really good site. I believe it's also free. Ancestry is definitely a good site that I always use to research more about specific individuals that I'm researching about. There's also the Imperial War Museum's Lives of the First World War, which is a website. It's more like a memorial to those who served during the First World War, an online memorial, so to speak. And you might even find a photo when you're browsing through that site. There's also the Scarlet Finders website that provides some very excellent information on those who served as nurses during the First World War. In particular, the website includes a roll of those who served with the units of the Scottish Women's Hospital. And these are the fields that you can populate when you're wanting to find an individual. Through our website, you can populate their name, so their first name, their second name, and if you know their initials instead, then you can do that as well. You can select what war they served in or served and died in, so the First or Second World War, and then you've got also additional fields that you can populate. So, for example, if you know their date of death, the age that they were at the death, that can further narrow down your search results. So once you have searched and populated your fields, you will typically results are presented in this way effectively. And individual records can be seen, as you can see on these screenshots on the slides. So as well as recording personal information on each individual, we also have additional records that can be found that show grave or memorial registers, the original headstone schedules, as well as exhumation reports. Here we were doing a search on Private Thomas Atkins, and the left-hand side, in my left-hand side, your right-hand side of the screen, in the left-hand side of the screen, you'll be able to see the Private Thomas Atkins, who we believe was the best fit. So we have the individual here who served with the Queen's Royal West Surrey Regiment, 1st Battalion. He died when he died in 1917. And as you can see, we also have his personal inscription, which is recorded, inscribed on his war grave, which is at rest. Now, it might surprise you, excuse me, it might surprise you to know that despite the passage of time, our records are not complete. New names are often found and need to be added to our Casualty Archive and then to the appropriate memorial or a new headstone erected. And we have been doing this, like I mentioned, in the Western Front alone, where 20 to 30 casualties are being found every year. We're also doing this throughout the country. In Glasgow alone, we have a lot of new comms cases, and that is effectively when we realise that a new casualty or a casualty that is buried in a specific cemetery has not been commemorated by us, then they will get a new headstone erected, or if it depends, if it's appropriate, their name will be inscribed onto a memorial. Now, in 2019, following a Channel 4 documentary, we created a special committee to investigate gaps in our war dead records. They found that after the First World War, outside of Europe, names were missed, and we didn't always treat people equally. And the report, together with the 10 recommendations and our response, are available on the Commission's website. The Commission, of course, apologises unreservedly for failing to commemorate these men and women and is committed to righting the wrongs of the past. We have also found that some names were only held in records and registers and not engraved on memorials at the time, largely as a result of prejudiced attitudes from a century ago. And this we are committed to fixing and have been fixing over the last 2 decades with new memorials in Abuja and Hong Kong. Many of our memorials continue to be altered to create additional spaces for the names by either fitting panels onto the blank or open spaces or engraving those names directly onto the stonework below the panels. This has allowed names to be added as they are discovered and to ensure those who were previously not recorded by name are remembered. And this work, of course, continues today as it has since the First World War. The main photo that you see here was taken in 2003 when a new memorial was erected in Dar es Salaam Cemetery, which is in New Panga Road, and this was to commemorate by name the 124 African casualties that were buried or that were previously buried or commemorated in Dar es Salaam Cemetery, which was on Puga Road. The reason we have this memorial was because Puga Road was declared unmaintainable in 1959, and initially those buried there were only commemorated numerically on a very small memorial in that cemetery. Now, searching the Commission's archive catalogue. So there are two methods of searching the catalogue. You can either do a very quick search or you can do an advanced search. A quick search is when it can be accessed through Find a Record search box on the home page of the Commission's archive catalogue page. Some popular search items have been pre-populated, as you can see on the screen here, and can be selected from the list shown beneath the search box. For example, Fabian Ware, cemetery, memorials to the missing, they've all been search terms that have been pre-populated. Or you can do advanced search. Now, the advanced search will enable you to perform a more selective search on different criteria, including across specific date ranges, or limiting the search to only return items with digitized content. You can further refine your advanced search criteria. So by default, a search will look for the words or words that you have entered. However, you can choose to change the default search criteria by clicking the Refine Search Criteria option. And there are three ways that you can further refine that search option. And that is with all the words, with at least one of the words, or without any words at all. And this is what an example of the record that comes up after such a search. E-files. Now, this collection of e-files represents most, but not all, of the First World War related e-files that are held in the Commission's archive. A further batch of around 1,000 e-files relating to the First World War casualties is currently being catalogued by the archive team and will be released later on in the year. Like I mentioned previously, we also have some very handy bite-sized how to research guides on our website that you can use to do further research into specific First World War casualties. And these guides, like I mentioned previously, will take you step by step through your initial research, showing you how to research the Commission's war records and our archives before making suggestions about where to discover additional information online. A variety of records can also be found locally at registry offices, courthouses, public libraries. You can contact your local historical societies and elsewhere, especially if you're interested in finding more about your own family. We also have the National Records of Scotland, which are based in Edinburgh. We have, again, like I mentioned, parish registers, in which a complete list, I believe, is also available or should be available in Scotland's People. We have Scottish Genealogy Society, again, an archive which is based in Edinburgh. Now, in the UK, casualties came mainly from military hospitals. They would have either died from wounds that they had received in action, from battle at sea or in the air, or from wounds that they had received due to training accidents. Scotland was used very much as a training base in both world wars, mainly due to its very complex and varied terrain, as well as the fact it was seen, like Northern Ireland, to be very much out with the capacity of the German radars, and that applied especially during the Second World War. The photo that you see here on the screen is the grounds of Achnacarry House in the Highlands, where combatants from the UK, France, Holland, Canada and America were amongst Allied fighters who were put through the paces at the Command Basic Training Centre. So this is the map that you see here. This is the area that I cover. So that's right from Argyll to Dumfries and to Dumfries and Galloway. And in this area, or in this region, the Commission commemorate more than 8,000 service personnel at more than 360 locations. So there's a lot of different cemeteries within here in which we commemorate and look after individuals who served and died during either the First or Second World War. In North Lanarkshire, we have 18 sites or 18 cemeteries in which we commemorate these individuals. Dalziel Cemetery is the largest, and in Dalziel Cemetery, we commemorate 83 casualties. So those are servicemen and women who have died. We also have in South Lanarkshire 34 cemeteries or sites in which we commemorate individuals, and the largest being Rutherglen Cemetery, in which we commemorate 87 casualties. We also have much smaller cemeteries and churchyards within these two regions, North Lanarkshire and South Lanarkshire. In North Lanarkshire, for example, there is an Old Man's Road burial ground in which we care for 2 casualties, and in South Lanarkshire, we have Douglas St Brigid's churchyard in which we care for only 1 individual. So I'm just going to tell you some more stories about those, about people that we care for in some of these cemeteries in these regions. So in Dalziel Cemetery, we care for Margaret Hodge Chalmers. She served with the Women's Royal Air Force during the First World War. The Women's Royal Air Force, or the WRAF, was the women's branch of the Royal Air Force, existing from the 1st of April 1918 right up until 1920, when it was disbanded. Its original intent was to provide female mechanics. Its original intent was to provide female mechanics in order to free up men, basically, for frontline service during the First World War. However, the organisation saw very high enrolment, with women also serving in a number of other non-combatant roles, including drivers, caterers, clerks and tailors, just to fill out other wartime needs. Margaret herself was a cook, according to her death certificate. She was billeted to Saltley College in Birmingham, and she died whilst in service on the 2nd of November 1918. Margaret was born in Motherwell to steelworker John Chalmers and his wife Margaret Hodge Chalmers. She was their 3rd child and 2nd daughter, coming after siblings John and Elizabeth. She died due to having contracted pneumonia. The photo that you see here, she was only 27 years old. The photo that you see here is not of Margaret, but it is of air mechanics of the Women's Royal Air Force, servicing a rotary aircraft engine during the First World War. Now, during the Second World War, conscription of women didn't really begin in the Air Force until 1941, and it only really applied to those between 20 and 30 years of age, and they had the choice of either the auxiliary services or factory work. Another individual that I just want to talk about is somebody called David Provan. He is commemorated by us in Lesmahago Cemetery, otherwise known as Abbey Green Cemetery. He was the oldest son of Edward and Janet Hart, who lived in Netherfold House in Lesmahago. He had 5 siblings, 2 died when they were younger. He actually served under an alias or a nom de plume, so a fake name. Provan was not actually his real name. His family name was Hart. And there was a lot of different reasons why people would enlist using an alias. They were either too young at the start of the war, they couldn't, or they couldn't serve because of an existing criminal record, or they were too old. They had been declared unfit for duty, so they weren't healthy enough to actually fight during the war. But in Provan's case, so in David's case, he was actually too young. He had enlisted when he was 17 years old at the beginning of the First World War, and you had to be 19 or over to enlist at that time. He was, because he wanted to join up, he changed his name to Provan. Now, he worked his way up from a private in the Lanarkshire Yeomanry, served in the Lothian Borderers as a corporal before eventually joining the Loyal North Lancashire Regiment, the 5th Battalion. On the 19th of August 1915 is when he was promoted as a temporary lieutenant for that regiment. The army created temporary commissions to accommodate the increase in numbers within the army itself. Although these officers received their commissions, for example, a certificate on vellum, the same way as a regular officer, and they received all the pay and allowances, and if killed, their widow would receive a pension equivalent to a regular officer. The commission was stamped temporary. This class of officer became known as temporary gentlemen and made up the majority of officers in the field as the war progressed. Neither they nor the army imagined that they'd remain in service after the war, although some of these temporary officers were offered permanent regular commissions, and if they accepted, they would be reverted back to second lieutenant, which is what happened in David's case. On the 27th of June 1917, he then became a second lieutenant, showing that he did, of course, have the necessary skills for this post. He was awarded the Military Cross according to the London Gazette. The reason he was awarded this award was on the 6th of April 1918, at least this is when it was published. He was awarded it for conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty in an attack. And I quote, it says in the London Gazette that when the advance was held up by an enemy strong point, he at once collected 15 men, counterattacked and captured the strong point, taking 2 machine guns and 20 prisoners. He showed great courage and contempt of danger. Unfortunately, Second Lieutenant David died of influenza in Dublin, Ireland on the 27th of December 1918 when he was just 21 years old. In an old Monkland cemetery, we have Second Lieutenant John McGibbon, son of John and Mary McGibbon of 64 Eglinton Street in Coatbridge. He served with the Royal Air Force during the First World War. John actually used to be a butcher before he enlisted in 1917. He died on the 10th of August 1918 when he was 18 years old due to a flying accident. And flying would have been a very dangerous thing during the First World War. World War I fighter pilots had a typical life expectancy of several weeks whilst flying in combat. Note, he doesn't actually have a war grave, as you can see in the photo. His family, he is buried with his family in their family lair, and this is an example of another type of grave marker that the Commission would look after, which we call a private memorial. Typically, only the casualty's name would be painted in and not other members of the family, as we're only really responsible for them and not anybody else. And to that end, the name would be inked in black, and the area around the grave would also be made accessible to visitors. We have, I also want to talk about this story in particular, and this is about Flight Sergeant George Allen Hinchelwood. He is an airman from Lanarkshire, and this is really to show our global commitment. I want to put a spotlight on the story of these airmen. George was a son of Robert and Mary Hinchelwood of Lark Hall in South Lanarkshire. On the evening of the 4th of May 1943, he was on board a Stirling bomber from number 218 Squadron in the Royal Air Force. It took off from Downham Market to bomb the German city of Dortmund. But in the early hours of May the 5th, the aircraft he was on board was shot down by a German night fighter after a short aerial battle and crashed at Murmerwood, south of Dockham in Holland. 5 men on board were killed and buried at Murmerwood, including George. However, 3 succeeded in eventually bailing out, but were taken prisoner by the Germans and had to spend the rest of the war in a prisoner of war camp. Today, you will find he is commemorated by the Commission in sorry, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but I'll give it a go anyway. He is commemorated by the Commission in Dantemade Cemetery in the Netherlands. His personal inscription reads, "My proudest possessions are memories of you, Mother." And this photo here is taken of number 218 Squadron. In the black row, you'll find Sergeant Herbert Socking, Sergeant William Forth, Sergeant John Smith, and Sergeant George Hinchelwood, who's at the end right-hand side. Moving on to gems in the Commission's archive. So here we have a letter from Sir Fabian Ware on the 23rd of December 1914. It was dated. This is a copy of a handwritten letter that was sent by Sir Fabian Ware whilst he was actually working with the mobile unit of the British Red Cross. The letter accompanies a list of graves which had been registered and marked by the unit from October to December 1914. And Ware describes the process in this letter by which he and his staff would mark the graves, how they would affix a wooden cross over the place of burial, which had a small copper plate at the back of the cross, inscribed, erected by the mobile unit BRCS to preserve the record found on this spot. A very fascinating letter that shows the initial measures taken by the Red Cross mobile unit that relied on Ware's connection with senior figures in the government and military for supplies, money and support, and the eventual progress towards the establishment of the DGRE an extensive and official bureaucratic organisation that was set up specifically for this task. Another piece of another thing that you'd find really interesting from the archives, or something that I believe that you'd find interesting, is a construction or a technical drawings. Here is a photo of a technical drawing of the Cross of Sacrifice, which was designed by Sir Reginald Blomfield, who was one of the principal architects employed by the Commission. There's also included in the archive pack a letter written by Edwin Lutyens, listing the possible names for what eventually became known as a stone of remembrance and what he called his stoneology. Lutyens proposed the Stone of Peace, the King's Stone, the Stone of Victory, and the Battle Stone, amongst many others. And this item reveals the efforts of the Commission to find the appropriate tone of commemoration, particularly in the face of a lot of varied public opinion, competing visions within the Commission itself. Now, it is very interesting to understand why the Commission wanted both the cross and the stone in the cemeteries. The cross was to act as a sort of focal point for those of the Christian faith, but the stone was intended to be non-denominational and even secular. And the Commission was aware that the British Empire encompassed many faiths, which is why they consulted leaders from the Hindu, Sikh, Muslim religions, but was also under a very considerable pressure in Britain to include an overtly Christian symbol. Here we'll have pictured are the staff card of Ernest Crankshaw, and who is pictured in the top left hand side. After serving with the Royal Army Medical Corps, Ernest joined the Imperial War Graves Commission as a gardener in 1920. In July 1940, he was actually imprisoned by the Germans in Lille. Following year, he was transferred to Ely VIII in Post, Big-Levitz, Silesia. Ernest returned to France in August 1944 and worked as a gardener caretaker until eventually retiring in 1958. His staff card is one of over 8,000 held in the Commission archive, and this collection forms a record of the array of careers in which people were employed, and often their civilian and military backgrounds. And it also encompasses figures like Sir Fabian Ware and Rudyard Kipling, as well as the most ordinary gardeners or secretaries. And these staff cards are particularly interesting for social historians because they give information on a range of employment types and how those jobs would change over time. They also show the employees' backgrounds, their previous military services. Occasionally, it would show their next job after they left the Commission, and the extent to which careers would have been handed down from father to son. The other photos are from a collection taken by Colonel Goodland, showing staff members, and these show gardeners and stonemasons at Lissenthorpe, which is a Commission burial ground for the dead of the First World War in Ypres Salient on the Western Front. His photo albums show the Imperial War Grave Commission's headquarters, their staff social events such as tennis tournaments, as well as visits to cemeteries and the devastated landscapes of France and Belgium. Think of the difference of working in a cemetery in 1920 amongst war devastation and unexploded ordnance, and being there in 1930 when the grass lawn is sown and all the headstone installed. The photos are very significant and unique, especially in telling the human story of the the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. And it is important to remember that the organisation's history includes not only the cemeteries and memorials, but also the men and the women who dedicated their working lives to caring for these sites and the people commemorated there. Shown here are some photos for the number 48 Graves concentration unit, which there's an album actually of photos taken by the German photographer Wolfgang Bennemann and presented to the commanding officer of the 48 GCU, who was Major Peder. The album gives a very unique insight into the work of locating, exhuming, identifying and reburying the casualties, particularly of the Normandy campaign of 1944, as well as the construction of military cemeteries in that area. The photos also show the personnel of the unit relaxing off duty, giving them a glimpse of their personal life that went beyond the important work and that they were engaged in. During the Second World War, Benjamin, who was a photographer that took these photos, actually worked as part of a propaganda company which was attached to the Wehrmacht or SS units to document battles, military exercises, for, of course, propaganda purposes. And it is assumed that he was taken prisoners and ordered or perhaps volunteered to document the Graves concentration process for the British Army. And this is some of the photos that he took. This photo shows local stonemasons that were working on construction at Imphal Cemetery in India. And just like the task of establishing and laying out a cemetery, construction work at these sites was arduous, very time consuming. It was all carried out by hand. Each wall, each entranceway, and each shelter building had to be built by the commission employees and local workers using hand tools, which is why it could take anywhere between 2 and 10 years to properly build a cemetery. And that all depended upon financial constraints, the availability of materials, the availability of labour, and the location and ease of access to cemeteries that the workers had. Here is a pencil crayon perspective sketch of Juana della Chagna War Cemetery, which is in Italy, and this was drawn in August 1947. Unlike their predecessors, the new generation of the commission architects actually had a precedent to follow, and preliminary designs for the cemeteries were made even before the war was over. Architectural plans and perspective sketches like this one are very striking examples of the artistic vision and skill of the commission architects. The perspective sketch includes, I don't know if you could make it out, but it includes the figure of a man leaning on the railings at the entranceway to the cemetery and a car parked to one side, which shows that the architects had actually envisioned these cemeteries and sites to be embedded within the local community and landscape. Staff today who are working on conservation management plans or considering repairs to the structural features of these sites will need to use these archive documents for information on what type of material was used historically or the placement of features, for example, where the walls and gates would have been, but that because they might have been removed, but they need to be reinstated, as well as previous solutions to problems and so on and so forth. So these drawings are definitely very useful. And this is the Graves of the Fallen book, which is a descriptive account of the work and policies of the Commission, which was that was published in 1919, written and by the Rudyard Kipling. Now, Kipling served as a literary advisor to the Commission. He also had a very personal link to wanting to work, or he had a personal motivation to wanting to work for the Commission. He'd lost his son during the war. He was killed in action, but his body was never recovered, and he never quite got over that. Which is why he was really motivated to work for our organisation. The book was illustrated by Douglas Macpherson, and it includes details on the history of the Commission, our guiding principles, and the practicalities of carrying out our work. It shows that the plans for the designs of war cemeteries were well established by then, but that the form and location of the memorials to the missing were not yet decided. Commemoration of the war dead and the way the Commission planned was unprecedented. And so it was very important for the Commission to publicise its work and policies. It's very interesting to consider how the general public actually viewed this document. There was a lot of controversy surrounding the Commission policies. Our initial publicising the initial publicising of our work upset a lot of people because they felt that they had not been given a chance to have their say. And this document shows that despite the varying priorities and personalities amongst the commissioners, our architects and artistic advisors, there was undoubtedly a very clear vision for the commemoration of the war dead, and the Graves of the Fallen invite suggestions from the public as to the form the memorials to the missing ought to take. I want to talk a little bit more about the controversies. Now, a lot of anger was directed at the Commission when it re-established our ground rules for a uniform style of commemoration. Many people didn't like what they perceived as state-controlled bereavement. They felt that they lost the ability to make personal decisions about how and where their loved ones would be remembered. And there was several key issues that inflamed public opinion. First being the bodies of those who had died abroad would not be repatriated. Second being the rounded headstones were neutral rather than being overtly Christian. Some felt that they should take the form of crosses. The third issue was that the large number of bodies were scattered across former battlefields in isolated graves and makeshift burial grounds. They had to be exhumed and concentrated into larger cemeteries, potentially causing further distress and confusion for relatives who were trying to locate that grave. And the fourth and final key issue that inflamed public opinion was that memorials to the missing were still very contentious, mainly because there was no standard design for them. And it was often women who raised the most powerful voices of protest. One of the most prominent campaigners against the key aspect of the approach of the DGRE and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, or the Imperial War Graves Commission as it was known then, was a Leeds housewife named Sarah Smith. Smith lost her 19-year-old son, who died of wounds in 1918 and was buried at Greville, a British cemetery in France. She despaired at the decision not to repatriate the dead, which is why Smith organised a petition lobbying the Prince of Wales, who was the president of the commission, to reverse that policy. She said she spoke on behalf of broken-hearted subjects and claimed the right which has ever been the privilege of the bereaved to personally honour their loved ones. She saw the moving of the dead into larger cemeteries in France, whilst refusing to move bodies back to their families as an act of tyranny. Over 2,500 people signed the petition. Although unfortunately the petition failed, it did lead to the creation of the British War Graves Association, a group that opposed the approach of the commission. It was based in Leeds, and by 1922 it had over 3,000 members. Sarah Smith stayed on as the British War Graves Association secretary. She would continuously write to the commission over many years, outlining new demands, which included returning bodies from Germany, ensuring concentrated bodies were reburied in coffins, and improving the legibility of engraved headstone. And she also campaigned for the provision of government funding to visit war graves abroad, and particularly for families who couldn't afford to do so. All the requests were politely rejected. Over the years, the British War Graves Association eventually shifted its focus to helping relatives visit battlefields abroad, but such was the Commission's sympathy and respect for Smith's relentless efforts that when she died in 1936, it paid tribute to her most valuable services on behalf of the bereaved. Another very prominent woman campaigner was Lady Florence Cecil, who was the wife of the Bishop of Exeter. She launched her own petition in 1919 to allow permanent headstones in the shape of crosses, cruciform headstones, rather than the Commission's planned uniform headstone, and that garnered 8,000 signatures, and alongside many are poignant details of the dead. Now, objections to the Commission's work, particularly Sarah Smith, the British War Graves Association, and Lady Cecil's petition, can be seen as an attempt to gain some type of compensatory control over events that were out of people's hands. Following vocal opposition from prominent figures and some MPs, debate was held in Parliament in May 1920 on the resentment aroused amongst relatives of fallen soldiers by the Commission's philosophy and methods. With some coaching from Rudyard Kipling, the MP William Burdett Coe eloquently presented the case for our work, assuring the House that the Commission was guided by infinite consideration and sympathy. He emphasised the breadth of military, religious and diplomatic figures who had been consulted in developing the cemeteries. He declared that nothing could be further from the truth than to say that the Commission is animated by the spirit of officialdom and bureaucracy. Rather, it strove to represent the union of all in motive, in action and in death. Winston Churchill, the then Secretary of State for War and thereby the chair of the Commission, closed the debate with words of resounding approval. After the debate, it was generally agreed that the Commission would be able to continue its work unimpeded. Moving on to how you can access our archives. Like I mentioned previously, just loading. We, of course, welcome visitors to the archive and encourage and support the use of our archive collection. The archive is physically based at the Commission head office in Maidenhead in Berkshire and is open to researchers and the general public by appointment. The archive is open Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. To 4:30 p.m. And we do ask that you notify us in advance of your intention to visit the archive, which will make sure that we are able to then book a suitable appointment for you and have all the records that you want to consult available. Please note that whilst we are able to answer some inquiries relating to the archives ourselves, we are, however, unable to undertake extensive research on your behalf. But you're, of course, you're also able to access the archives online. Taking a while to load. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Commonwealth War Graves Foundation. So the Commission has a charity called the Commonwealth War Graves Foundation, which aims to really engage and educate people with the work of the Commission and the inspiring stories of the men and women who died whilst fighting or serving during the two world wars. We offer a programme of innovative and educational and engagement activities, such as the Speakers Programme, the Foundation Internship Scheme, which runs annually in France and Belgium, and of course the Nur Inayat Khan digital exhibition at the Runnymede Air Forces Memorial, which was developed alongside the Girl Guiding Association. These projects have all tell the stories of the 1.7 million fallen Commonwealth servicemen and women, and of how the Commission now, as then, continues to honour their sacrifice. You can, of course, support us today to help us inspire, inform, educate, and involve and engage people with stories of sacrifice that must never be forgotten. You can support by donating to us or joining our membership scheme, and you can find out more about those two things on our website, the Foundation website, as well as the Commission website. By making a donation, you will enable us to fund new education initiatives and activities to engage even more people from all communities with the history of the two world wars. We also have the Commission's Experience in Borains in France, which is a very unique visitors attraction that shines a light on our work. And visitors will, for the first time, be able to take a look behind the scenes at the work that is needed to commemorate the 1.7 million Commonwealth casualties from the First and Second World Wars. Our free audio guide will walk you through each aspect of the work we do, from the story of how we still recover and rebury the dead today, to the skilled artisans, craftsmen at work in maintaining the world's most impressive and recognisable monuments and memorials. A trip to the battlefield of the Western Front is definitely not complete without a visit to the Commission's Experience. And just to add, the Commission's Experience was also awarded the Best Tourism Project in Europe at the 2019 British Guild of Travels Writers International Tourism Award. So we do have an award to back us up in saying that we are definitely worth visiting. If you would like to discover more, visit our amazing sites, explore our portal. You can sign up on our local Facebook page, CWGC Supporters of Scotland, as well as follow us in a variety of different social media platforms, including Twitter, as well as Instagram, if you're on it. And if you're wanting to find out more about volunteering opportunities, we have the Eyes on Hands On scheme, in which volunteers visit local war grave sites in their area, clean up the headstones, and effectively are able to care for the casualties as well, and where we care for casualties in our sites. Now, thank you so much for listening. But yes, you can find out all about the existing volunteering schemes on our website. And if you'd like to join, please do sign up. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to pass them on to Claire, who can contact me with any questions you have upon seeing this recording. That is me. That is it.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
That was amazing.
Sharing.
There's so many, I think when you watch that presentation, there's just so many questions that you could actually ask. I mean, I always find it amazing how families, and one of the courses actually that I did, they made a lot of, the fact that they only had so many characters to tell, put the details, on the inscription, and how some families found that so difficult to fit that in. But I suppose
another controversy was not just the characters itself, but they actually had to pay for the personal inscription.
Right.
But I believe it was 3.5 pennies or something like that, which was not well received by the public as well, given that some governments were actually paying for the personal inscriptions on the family's behalf. But the thing is, we never would chase it up anyone for money. But a lot of people didn't know that, so they got put off by that as well.
And was that for the full inscription, or was it per letter?
Per letter.
Yeah. It's a shame, isn't it? Because some people perhaps, especially going through war when things are maybe tight as well, it makes everything so much harder.
Definitely.
Really.
Definitely. And I think that was part of it. They were just a bit like, and that was also something that wasn't really well received by the British public at the time. But they never changed their mind. The government did. The Commission I don't believe changed their mind in the public having to pay for it. I think the thing was that the commissioners thought that the public would want to make a contribution, like a monetary contribution,
Yeah.
but not everybody was in a position to be able to make that contribution.
And then when you think about it, a lot of these people would later then go on to perhaps contribute towards local memorials and to make sure that their family members were on that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And did I send you the list for the commission sites in North Lanarkshire?
No.
That's what I forgot to do. I think I forgot something. I'll send that to you after this chat.
Okay.
So it was the sites. It's not just in North Lanarkshire. Did I say South Lanarkshire as well?
Yeah.
North
and South, yeah. So yeah, I'll just run through the talk. So the talk for next month is on the 12th of May at 7 p.m. Speaker will be Wiebke McGee of North Lanarkshire Archives, and she'll be talking about using North Lanarkshire Archives for family history research. So very relevant to the area of Lanarkshire. Sahar's obviously covered a lot on Air Force relatives or Air Force men, which obviously is something that really interests me, and I'm sure a lot of you know that. I do run the Allied Air Force research Facebook page and website, so get in touch or have a look if Air Force records interest you as well. So thank you very much, Sahar, for your time today.
No problem. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.